Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of Mex Move podcast, where we, Damien and I, look at the most important business stories breaking in Mexico City, as well as review larger topics that are of interest to the Mexican economy, to the Mexican investment community. How are you, Damien?
Very well, Eduardo. How are you?
I'm doing well, as far as we can be in these times of great uncertainty. Tariffs are in and out. It's hard to know what to think, what to make out of all this. What do you think?
Look, I think that the Mexico situation is, from a relative perspective, stronger than, let's say, it was a month or so ago. So as things stand, as we speak, Mexico is going to face no tariffs on USMCA goods. That's been confirmed. Mexico will face, like every country in the world, 25% on autos and steel. And we still don't know what's going to happen to auto parts. That's going to be defined in May, as I understand it. The rest of the world, except for China, is going to face 10% tariffs, not the 50% tariffs, 40%, 20% that many of them were going to face under the so-called Liberation Day reciprocal tariff strategy that's now been put on pause, as we all know, for 90 days. But China is going to face 125% for now, at least. So what does that mean for Mexico? Well, I mean, I think there's two effects. There's the relative effect. How does this position Mexico vis-a-vis other countries? And then there's the global effect. What does it mean for the global economy? And therefore, what does impact will that have on Mexico? In terms of the relative effect, Mexico will have a 10% edge for all intents and purposes over other countries, which makes Mexico more attractive, other things being equal. And in addition to that, there's a sort of message being sent that Mexico and Canada, of course, are part of the North American bloc, and they get this preferential treatment. So whereas tariffs may come in and out, there's a sense that you're probably a bit safer, a bit better off with an investment in Mexico than elsewhere, although definitely not totally safe as we've seen. Also, importantly, Mexico competes with China in a number of products, not in every product. And China, for now at least, and this is obviously a moving target, has been cut out. So auto parts, China has grown a lot in auto parts. Mexico's obviously the largest auto part exporter to the US. So I think that there's likelihood that the companies are going to try and use their existing Mexican facilities to make auto parts to the extent that they can instead of China. In addition to that, Mexico needs to be USMCA compliant to be tariff-free. So there's going to be a strong incentive to use Mexico or US or Canadian inputs to meet USMCA rules of origin and not import from Asia or China. So that will have a knock-on positive effect through the supply chains in North America as everyone tries to get USMCA compliant. So the strategy of this government, which is obviously made in Mexico, of the Sheinbaum government, is very much aligned with the incentives put in place by the Trump tariffs. There are other products, white goods, fridges. Mexico, is a large producer of washing machines, fridges, and competes more or less equally with China. So you'd expect multinational companies to ramp up production from Mexico to the extent that they can and cut production in China or divert production in China to Asia and Europe where they won't face these kind of tariffs. Mexico's furniture market has been hit quite hard over the last decade. And you expect again, to the extent that it's possible, to ramp up production in Mexico, export that to the US. And meanwhile, China and maybe some other Asian countries facing this 10% tariff will export more to Europe and to Asia itself. And on you could go: chemicals, plastics, seafood, agricultural products. All of these areas, China is very big and so is Mexico. And you might expect companies, if they're spread around the world, to try and beef up Mexican production or lay on extra production lines and divert production from China to other places or cut back production if there is a demand from other places. So there's some kind of relative gain for Mexico. One of the items, so I was going through the data, which struck me as quite interesting, is garlic. China is the largest producer of garlic in the world, but Mexico is right up there and growing very fast. It's grown eightfold in garlic. So if you're a garlic producer in the Bajío, the closing out of the Chinese market could be quite good news. But then you've got the effect on the global economy. Obviously, there was markets reacted with a massive relief to the pause on the reciprocal tariffs, except for China. And to the extent that this makes it easier for the global economy to avoid a recession, then that's good for Mexico. But that's relative to how we were, a few days ago, but relative to a month ago, no question that prospects for global growth have dimmed, and everyone is in a worse shape, and Mexico looks as if it's going to be heading for a recession, partly because of Trump, partly because of the hangover from the fiscal deficits going into the elections in the middle of last year, partly because of the constitutional reforms. But put that all together, and economists, even a month ago, were anticipating close to zero growth in Mexico. So it's definitely not going to be an easy year, but I think we can conclude that Mexico's better off versus not having this 10% tariff. It's a lot better off versus China. And the importance of complying with rules of origin is going to make everyone try and find local supply chains to meet those rules of origin and therefore be eligible for zero tariffs. Do you agree with that, Eduardo?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Damien. I think the situation we're facing today, but with Trump, we never know. 90 days is a long way. So I think he'll figure it out that the best way to go is not to have those reciprocal tariffs as he had unveiled on Liberation Day or Destroying Day or whatever name you want to give it. But I think what is really important is I think the damage to the U.S. economy was softened a little bit by this 90-day pause that he took. That's good. The advantage that Mexico has diminished a little bit when we were talking about 46% tariff on Vietnam or Malaysian garments. That was going to be a huge impact. Now it's not as big, and maybe they will sustain it. Maybe not as many plants as we might have imagined would be relocating. But overall, I think the combination of the two is good news. There are internal problems in Mexico that will have to be faced. Like you said, the budget is being cut to reach a 4% deficit in terms of GDP, or 3.9, which means less spending by the government. Fiscal revenue is growing apparently quite successfully, but there will be some pain going forward for the Mexican economy, and the judicial reform is still creating a lot of chaos, I think. I don't think it'll happen, but I wish the administration would realize that reform is going to hurt the country economically and legally. But we'll have to wait and see. But the situation brightens a little bit the future for Mexico as we are speaking. And let's hope that auto parts is not included in the 25% tariff, so that Mexico could have an advantage on that industry as well.
Great. So let's move on, Eduardo. There was an interesting article in the FT on fracking back on the table in Mexico. I don't know if you had a chance to see that, but as many people know, Mexico depends on the US for 70% of natural gas. I think it would be very difficult. It would be impossible for Mexico to provide electricity to the country, to the factories, or to the people without US natural gas. And obviously what's happening in the US has made the government, concerned about that, extreme dependency. And as a result, according to the FT at least, there are government conversations with the private sector kind of expanding fracking. They may call it something else than fracking for political reasons. But it's an example of how there are a lot of ideological shifts going on. Trump is sort of unending everyone's thinking, and Mexico and other countries, can't absolutely guarantee the access to natural resources that they're getting from other countries, and so they need to have at least a bit of self-reliance. And I think if they invite the private sector, and especially U.S. companies, to explore fracking, there's probably very good opportunities given the geological similarities between the Texas and parts of Mexico. That would also be a sort of potential opportunity at least coming out of a crisis, unless of course you're against fracking on ideological grounds or environmental grounds, which many people are.
I hope that the ideology gets turned down and reality sinks in to make decisions that are good for the country. Yes, Mexico is completely dependent on natural gas from the U.S. This morning in the press conference from the president, energy minister, and director of the CFE were putting forward their plans on electricity and generating electricity in the country, and they seem to be much more open than the previous administration in bringing in private capital. I know the rules of the game have changed. The government has much more control of the sector, but at least it seems that they're trying to open it up. And maybe what you just read and reported on what the FT on oil production is another indication that their reality is becoming invite them so that they might be able to squiggle a little bit out of their ideological framework and allow Mexico to bring in capital into that sector, private capital.
So, Eduardo, last week we talked about Alfa and the final part of its value unlocking strategy coming into place with the spin-off of Alpec, the holding company of Alpec. So now Alfa has become Sigma, the food business. That happened this week. And then we saw, and I want to know what you make of it. We saw this week Herdez planning something not totally dissimilar, spinning off Nutrisa, its retail, also presumably to give investors and management kind of more focus and enable them to choose between one and the other. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. They're gonna spin it off by a dividend. They're gonna give. It's not very clear how many shares per share shareholders have of Grupo Herdez to now have Grupo Nutrisa traded on the stock market. Like we said last week, that these conglomerates sometimes separating the parts makes much more sense so that investors could pick what they actually want to buy. Nutrisa is a very interesting company. I mean, I think Herdez bought it in 2013. And since then, it's been acquiring other similar retail food companies like Cielito Querido Café, which is a chain of coffee houses, as well as this yogurt company called Moyo, and Chilambalam, which is a very Mexican company that sells things with chili and tamarind, and you make your own product, combining things. And they're all in retail establishments, generally in malls. So I think it could be an interesting proposition. The shareholders of Grupo Herdez will own the company in the same proportion, I assume. So we'll have another different retail company on the Mexican market that I think is good in general sense for the market to give more options to investors.
Yeah, I think unquestionably it's good for the core Herdez business. I think also they get, hopefully at least, they get rid of a potential tax liability because Nutrisa is in a sort of tax dispute with the tax authorities in Mexico. I think some analysts reading some of the research reports a little bit kind of skeptical about the 12 peso 28 per share value for Nutrisa, which gives it a $200 million valuation. That's about 2 times EV to sales. And it's not been growing. They've been closing stores. It's not been doing especially well. So in the end, that's a theoretical valuation. As soon as it starts trading, we'll see what the real valuation is. They can put whatever price they want, but until someone buys and sells, we don't get to know what the real price. So the holding of Alpec, which started trading on Monday, opened down 12% or so, and I would expect that Nutrisa, probably will end up trading below that theoretical valuation. Whereas on the other hand, Herdez, which is with this spin-off, would be under 10 times earnings with great brands, great cash flow, excellent management, is probably going to do better than that theoretical valuation. So we may see some
adjustment
between the two. But I think companies spinning off non-core businesses, either by selling them or in this case dividending them out, is a good trend.
Just a little footnote on the Alpec. It started trading on Black Monday, so maybe it was the downside was carried away by what was going on in the market. But yeah, you're right. Then that's where investors set up the price, the real valuation of the companies.
It's a real pleasure to have with us today Ricardo Solar. Ricardo is Executive Vice President for Circana, and Daniel Morimoto, who's the Vice President for Circana. Ricardo is, in fact, Mexican, but he lives in LA, and Daniel is Brazilian, lives in Brazil, Latin America, a little bit.
Everywhere, yeah. Brazilian with a Mexican heart.
Ricardo looks after global growth and LatAm. Danielle looks after LatAm. Before we start, just wanted to, and then you can correct me if I got it wrong, give you my sense of what Circana does. I think in very simple terms, Circana tracks what people buy and why, from toys and beauty products to groceries and gadgets. It helps big brands understand what's hot, what's not, and what's coming next, using sales data, surveys, tech, and analytics like AI to stay ahead of the trends. The goal to help clients, big consumer companies and retailers, sell more product and optimize their supply chains and quite a lot of more things. They work with about 75% of the world's CPG companies, 500,000 stores, look at 30 million products. So basically, their finger is on the consumer pulse in every market in the world, especially Mexico's. How did I do describing Circana?
Maybe he can work for sales.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think you gave a much better explanation than we can do.
Yeah.
You're hired.
Okay, so why don't we start in general terms? This question could be for either of you, Ricardo or Danielle. How does consumer behavior in Mexico compare to consumer behavior in the US? What's different and similar to the Mexico consumer?
Let's start.
I can start. Well, I think I'll give the Mexico perspective. You can give the US perspective or more a global perspective. I think things have changed in Mexico in the past years with connectivity, and Mexicans really into social media. The trends influence is much higher right now here. So products are coming faster, sooner because the Mexican consumers are engaged with novelty and are engaged with what's happening all around the world. So in terms of the industries that we track, we see that there, for all these new things that are coming in from entertainment or from the beauty side or from the tech industry, there's a lot of interest from Mexicans to learn more and know more. Of course, sometimes due to supply chain demands or like the prioritization of the distribution, products can come a little bit later. But I think this is something that the industry is thinking about, how to bring the products faster to the country and really deliver to the consumers what they're looking for. So in that sense, there are differences. Of course, Latin America as a whole, is still looks for price. Wants to find the best deals possible, but at the same time, I think the more innovation we can bring to keep the pace of the international markets or the markets that are generating this influence, the more we can capture, this consumer's attention and the purchase realization.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree with that. And I was going to date myself because when I was younger, a boy, and I used to go to the theater to watch a movie, you'd have to wait a month before a new release will come to Mexico. All right, that's no longer the case. The immediate access to content now and to in social media, but also theatrical films, licensing, and innovation and new products. It's now much faster. So consumers around the world have the same access to that content that is generated either in the US or in Europe or LatAm immediately, and they're fans and they're following even faster, right? They're in the right groups, they're in the right podcasts, they're in the right TikTok threads to get that content. And the moment it's available, they're going to find ways to consume it, to see it, and the same with consumption, right? We see those same patterns, and at the end, the brand loyalty or the emotion that connects you to a certain product or segment, it's very equal everywhere. There is the same aspirations, and collectors are collectors around the world, and fans of Disney movies are fans everywhere. So we see that immediacy, right, of availability and consumption, and then we track it in our systems, and we can take many times learnings from different regions on what is working and not, and apply those globally within entertainment and in CPG as well.
But what when you look at sort of the brands that succeed in Mexico and the brands that don't succeed, separates the successful ones from the unsuccessful ones? How is that different to the US?
I think anyway, as even though Mexicans are engaged with the world, they are very proud of Mexico and their culture. So the brands that really want to succeed here, they gotta adapt and really talk with these consumers, and have a straightforward communication to engage also with them. It's not just coming with your international package and think that you will generate this connection with consumers. You really need to have to talk and adapt the way your brand is, even position the campaigns that you do, and it really works. I'll give you an example, like for the luxury industry that is very strong here. Mexico represents 50% of Latin America, so like all the other countries combined represent the same as Mexico, and many of these brands have been here for many years. One of the big reasons is the retail landscape. The retail landscape, I think is very favorable for luxury brands to come in, and engage. And as they are here, and we have stores like Palacio de Hierro, that is a this big luxury department stores, but at the end, that converts these international brands and luxury brands and their positioning into something that the Mexicans can relate with. And I think that even the name of del Palacio de Hierro, its history, like it makes this connection. So I think for brands to succeed here, even though you come with this international positioning or no aspiration, it's always important to really have this connection with the consumers.
Yeah, and I will expand into that. I think the Mexico market is there's a lot of brand affinity and loyalty. So the big brands will continue to be successful in Mexico, and for many of our customers, Mexico represents a big portion of their business, being number one, number two country after the U.S. in the toy market, for example, which people are sometimes surprised. But if you look at the consumption of toys in Mexico, the culture of kids, the Kids Day, family. You have Three Kings Day, which happens only here in Spain in a big way. You have that second seasonality, makes for a very big market, but also it's a very branded market, very loyal market. Sometimes things don't work because maybe pricing is not the right packaging, the way that is presented to the market, but those are adaptations. But there's also content that is very local, right? As much as there's content that works in Mexico, there's content that works in books in the US that will never translate into Mexico. Some of it will be, Hunger Games will be global, right? But there are certain authors that will be very US based, and we don't see that traction outside. So there is also content that is localized, that is regionalized. But when you talk about the global overall presence, Mexico is a very branded, very consumer base that we see majority of success, and companies that have experience in the market, they know how to adapt, what to bring, what price points, etc., to make that launch successful.
Because in TikTok, there's I think in beauty, which Danielle, you look at a bit. Are you familiar with dupes, which are sort of
course, yeah.
I mean, dupes are obviously duplicate beauty products that have a similar kind of proposition to the more expensive alternatives. Is that doing well in Mexico, or is this brand loyalty in Mexico meaning that dupes is not such a big phenomenon here?
It is, because for such a segmented population, you do have the people that will be willing to buy or have the capacity to buy these international brands, and other ones that are aspirational. They want to get there, but they are not willing to pay the price. And the dupes trend that is happening all around. I think the main reason for this to be happening is consumers. One, these brands are very good at connecting, what I was saying before, like they talk with these consumers. Many of them are local brands, that are much better at communicating with the consumers. Second, they are really focused on the delivery, the benefits that the products are bringing. If you deliver the benefit at a lower price. And with this engagement, of course, the consumer will be interested. But beauty is such a dynamic industry that things are always shifting because the trends in beauty are always shifting. And as they are always shifting, you want to buy everything. No? And sometimes your pocket doesn't let you buy all the products from the brands that you like. So some of them, no, you will be willing to pay. Some of them you will be willing to just try from another brand. And well, at some point, if you're engaged, you buy from the brand that you're aspire to buy.
I want to delve a little bit on the connectivity, the social media, the influencers. Do Mexicans follow international influencers, or they have their own influencers that they need to follow that promote brands? What's your take on how that works?
Mexican influencers gain a lot of importance in the past years. What's been happening for years in Mexico with influencers is, in general, Mexico is like the door for Latin America, especially the Spanish speaking countries. And these influencers here are being able to connect, with Mexico, with the rest of the countries, and with the Hispanic population in U.S. So that's why they're gaining much more importance even outside of Mexico. So even though Mexico is still following trends, international trends, and it's important because these major influencers they impact all markets. More and more, we're seeing that the local ones are gaining more importance here and elsewhere.
And I wonder how much of those trends that we're seeing in other industries in the United States, like with Book Talk. These are groups that talk about books and what they're reading, and new authors in TikTok are driving massive growth of independent publishers that they publish to their base of millions their new novel. They do self-publishing. Their followers start following. They start recommending to others. Suddenly, they become the power of an editorial house, and they have the power to then negotiate their contracts with the big publishing houses. So it's like a reversal of the model, where is the independent, the writer, the creator, the one that becomes the entity, the company follow and with the strength of their with all these followers, and then having massive success. I wonder how much of that will start happening in Latin America as well.
That's a language barrier when we talk about books.
Yeah.
There is a language issue there that does not allow for those.
But I wonder if a local, writers and content creators will start following that model, and they'll start creating those communities. Then they'll push that content out from the base up, right?
And one thing that I was wondering, and you, Daniel, kind of like address, is that it's a two-way street, or at least you're beginning to see a two-way street where brands or things that are happening in Latin America might influence Latin communities in the US and maybe somewhere else, or vice versa. Probably not with the same strength that the international community does in Latin America. Am I right? Or
completely right, especially because of the importance of Hispanics already in the U.S. population. If we take 10 years ago, the Hispanics accounted for around 13-14% of U.S. population. Now, in 2023, it was 20%. 20% for us in our consumer base, we're talking about 17% of all general merchandise purchases coming from the Hispanic population, and 50% from all the CPG, food and beverages consumption coming from this part of the population. So we're seeing that this is becoming very important also for the U.S. consumption. And right now, for example, that we see a lot of sensibility with what's happening with the economy, and how the consumer in the U.S. is worried. The first community that is started to think more about what they're spending on, or know what they're gonna buy, are the Hispanics, because they're worried with the economy in general, and this became a big issue, because if Hispanics, that are 20% of the U.S. population, stop buying, you have a hit on the overall consumption. So for sure, I think like it's a both ways, and also we have this big trend that is entering Mexico, like people really valuing products that are coming from here. And at the end, this also generates an impact and influence on other markets.
Can you tell us a little bit about how AI is impacting consumer analytics in general around the world and obviously in Mexico as well? I mean, and Liquid AI, your specific product?
I think, AI is such a big topic. Everyone wants to really find a usage, and I think that what became very common is, well, for a personal use. You want to find a recipe, or you want to. I even have friends that like take the tarot cards with ChatGPT. It became fun. It's like our buddy that you ask anything, and it's been a struggle, for companies and businesses to really find how to apply this to the day to day in their businesses. Circana, became Circana. We became this brand 2 years ago, focused on how we're going to use technology in our data sets to really support these companies to start taking this step into AI. And liquid data is exactly this tool. What we want to do is to give a tool for all companies. This body that will help them make the best decisions based on our data. A good, well prepared, well trained model that will, besides using the data, take all their internal information, their business plans, their objectives, to direct what or give recommendations of what they should be doing with the business. So this has a huge impact, because it's not just applying AI to certain processes. That is what everyone is doing right now, but moving into business decisions, and business plans, and what I really need to do to make my business thrive.
Yeah, on top of that, what gets me excited about it, when you do think about AI, the companies like ours have been using machine learning for several years. They use it in a way to make it more efficient how we catalog, how we clean, how we obtain the data, how we match that data to retailers' catalogs of products, the product number, the description. We've been automating that for years now. Where before it was done by hand, basically, someone will be looking online and seeing what product is this and does it match this, which was very slow. That has been more and more automated, where 90% or even more now is done by machine learning. There's still a percentage of product that needs to be cataloged and classified manually, because it's just so hard to find that product with different variations with different retailers, Target, Walmart, or Comercial Mexicano, whatever. But now this next step of AI, for me, is the promise of unleashing the creativity, the capacity of the people, the analysts. The people behind are spending hours creating PowerPoint slides. They're creating charts. They're creating tables for our customers, manually. We have great systems to download and do, but still there's a significant amount of hours to put these presentations together. If we can, which we now have the capability to train our systems to not only put slides together, but to tell a story. Like, what is the story you want to tell? Is it about a growth story? Is it about some potential risks? Is it about opportunities, what we call white space opportunities, areas where a company can grow? AI can help put that together very quickly, so people can spend then the time to analyze and understand how does this apply to the customer, presenting this to the customers, talking about plans, and making it more about predictive too, like what could happen, what are the potential scenarios. So people get scared about AI is going to take my job. I don't think so. I think what it's going to do is unleash hours and hours of brain power and creativity that today are tied up with more manual stuff, and make it much more valuable. And that's what we're working on.
And in Mexico, I think about 85% of transactions under 1,000 pesos are done with cash. You probably don't know who the end buyer is. Does that make it a more difficult market to analyze? Or does that actually make it a more interesting market because there's a paucity of information where you can therefore add value?
Well, I think It is challenging in terms of how to develop other channels. For example, this has been the challenge from the e-commerce here. If you take Latin America or compare countries like Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, e-commerce representativity between the overall consumption is lower. And it's lower because of the banking or penetration into the population. So it makes harder for this type of channels that depend on digital to become more important. But what I think it balances the situation and makes Mexico actually sometimes easier to track is the retail landscape that is so well developed. You have such a big chains that represent or cover the whole market. And as we track the retailers and everything that goes through the retailers, if the consumer is buying cash or credit card, we're tracking anyway. No, so I think like it's not a matter of how they pay. No, I think this is something that all the fintechs coming in, and the credit expanding through them is going to be addressed. But for our business, no, Mexico is a country that has this big retailers, very well developed, that makes it easier to understand the market.
So the data is there, regardless of the payment system that people follow. So what would happen? I mean, if credit expands, what would be the consequences for you in the sense of what services can you add to what you already have, or is there none?
For our services, there's no impact. What might happen is, of course, you have more credit. You can expand the consumption or give access to other people to buy items that have a higher price. And for example, for us that we track the tech industry, big TV screens. We're having this discussion now. Getting ready for the World Cup here. How are Mexicans updating their TVs? They like it big. They want to really, they don't really care about the technology. They care about how big it is and if I can really watch the shoes from the soccer player there that is kicking the ball.
Football too, so the two combined.
Exactly. So I think like credit, of course, will allow consumers to buy more by higher ticket items, and this, of course, has an impact on the investments that our clients make in the market. And how important it is in the world.
So I think the TikTok influencer is Doris Insulin.
There you go. Yeah.
30 million followers.
Yeah.
Real.
It's amazing. The quality, the makeup that she wears, and the video production is incredible. From Veracruz.
She's not the biggest.
Yeah.
You have some other one. Like you have a big one here that Yuya, that has been here for years and has her own makeup brand, and a big share of the market. And this is a trend that we've been seeing. Like this, influencers not only influencing the consumption of other brands, but creating their own brands by themselves, and also being able to capture all these dollars or this pesos.
Industries. I mentioned talk, but toys also. We have artists collecting one toy and putting that in TikTok, and then become a phenomenon. Like that happens with Squishmallows, which is these little plushes that kids and adults collect, and now they have like 100 in their room, right? And as it started, it's a successful brand, but then someone takes it on TikTok and puts it. I love these things, and they're so soft and they're so great, and hit a big success for the company that is doing those, and we are tracking.
So in that sense, a TikToker, an influencer in TikTok, not only can help someone else, but obviously could join with someone to develop a brand, a product, a consumer item that was
a trend now of creators or even communities creating products that then the manufacturer takes and develops. Then there's a case of some Nike shoes or some sporting shoes that were taken by the community, and then they were reshaped and redone, and this is how we would like to, and then they take it and developed, and produce.
But you gotta be very careful with this, because at first it always started with branding items, with my influencer brand. Now what consumers, and because of TikTok and social media in general, what they really want is to have this influencer participate in the creation of the product and the development of the product. Before they really need to know that this person was part of this development, because then they get engaged and understand that that person that I really trust or rely on was part of the creation of that.
We talked about TikTok. Is Instagram on the same level of influence, or is TikTok the leader of, or YouTube for that matter?
Yeah, I think all social media depends on the generation. We talk a lot about TikTok because Gen Zers, are much more connected with that. It became like the main source of searches. When they're not going to Google to ask for things, they're going to TikTok. And Gen Zers are starting to influence the other generations. But at the same time, we're now seeing a shift, on other generations, even baby boomers, because of their purchase power, becoming also important for the brands, and they have to also connect through social media. So there we see a start of like influencers 60 plus, that are being successful, and are being able to really, engage with their public, and it's important. It's important because it became like a main channel to talk. We need representation from all generations, and I think Instagram does a better job, or even Facebook does a better job at connecting than TikTok with these other generations, even millennials.
What about the Mexican Americans and the Mexicans? Do you see sort of CPG companies having a unified kind of campaign for Mexicans and Mexican Americans ever, or are they always treated as sort of separate markets?
I think this is becoming more and more important. We see that our clients want to understand similarities between both. You still have differences because of access, access to products, access to brands. Of course, if I live in the US, I can buy certain products or certain brands that I cannot here in Mexico. But the overall trend, or what they're trying to do is really take this whole group as one, and well, take all the opportunities that you can, because they are very still proud of their heritage. You see that there's a big influence on this. So that's why also we see that these Mexican brands are thriving in the US, because they're still connected, even emotionally connected with their origins.
And it also depends on the generations that you're talking about, because Mexican Americans that live, in the US, it depends if it's first generation, second generation, third generation, the level of acculturation that they have, right? If they're just coming, they have very fresh the tradition, right? The dates, the seasonalities, the consumption. If it's now, second, third generation, these kids have gone already to, U.S. schools, U.S. education, surrounded by, the U.S. community, and the acculturation or the integration, right, is different, but they still have that heritage. They still speak to, their parents and grandparents in Spanish. There's still that connection, but it's different, right? And the behavior starts to become more mainstream in terms of brand consumption, but that is becoming a big focus for us in the company, is to understand and track more of that Hispanic market. For many years, retailers have been very interested in the border stores and how there is a different mix that we need to have in those stores. For Three Kings, product is located in those border stores as well in Mexico. But more and more, this is a source of, a lot of power those consumers are having, in the market, and a say, right? And they can sway things one way or the other, as is happening today, and we're tracking in some markets. So we are putting more effort into understanding the segment and then guiding our customers on, is it about mix? Is it about messaging? Is it about targeted audiences? Is it about seasonality? Is it about pricing? All of these things are critical.
But we have a big example here. After 20 years living in the U.S., what are the brands you love from Mexico that you want to come here and buy and take there?
Mexican food.
Well, yeah, all of us.
So what about your children, Ricardo? They're Mexican, but were brought up almost entirely in the U.S. How different are their purchasing habits, brand loyalty to their Mexican cousins that live in Mexico?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. They were 2 and 3 years old when we moved to the US, right? So very little. Even with the difference of just 1 year between the two and the three, the older one had much more of that affinity and ties to Mexico, just with 1 year difference. Wow. Yes, so she, for her, Mexico and Spanish and the culture is very, very important. And she's highly connected. The younger one, California, lives in San Diego. She loves the place. She's more of a California, girl. And I feel her much more integrated into, the culture there. So there's difference. I think that speaks to, again, the generations, and they have that connection and that roots back to it, but you will have differences. Right? One is very American in her groups and beliefs and what she purchases and what she wears. The other one is lives now in Spain, in Madrid, but she's very tied to the Mexican culture and even her, purchases food, etc. So there's variations there, and it's just amazing to see that in our own home.
It's also personalities, probably as well. Because, yeah, I mean, I'm married to an American, and my both kids were born here, but it has its own style of being, regardless of the environment that they grew up. I think they also become their own individuals. Yes. But yeah, in general, I think the Hispanic community changes as it stays in America a little longer.
Yeah, as generations pass,
Like with any other
yeah,
immigrant group.
they integrate more and more. But you have in regional chains that understand that Hispanic influence, not only affinity, but influence in general population, and those segments in the store that are called the ethnic sections keep growing. And you start finding things that you only found in Mexico stores. Now they're in the mainstream supermarkets of
Yeah, salsas have become a very big issue in America.
and condiments and package of things that are done in Mexico, the North Suizas and the things like, even with the same packaging, with the same messaging, etc. It's like, wow, I used to do, use that, or my mom used that. Now it is in that mainstream, and Americans, the ones that are second years, third years, or just American citizens in general, we start testing those flavors, we start trying those things, and they like it and incorporate it because also Mexican food is in vogue, right?
I think it all depends on the community you're inserted, right? Like if your community is mostly Hispanic, you of course will absorb some of this. But like if you're at the end your friends are more Americans or have different influences, of course you're gonna behave in another way.
Last question for Danielle. How are Brazilian consumers different to Mexicans? Have you noticed, is there a big difference, or are they driven by the same trends?
It's a good question. I think we have many similarities, but many differences. Mexico was always more open to international brands, while Brazil was always more close, and had to develop their own brands. So you see that local brands in Brazil have more influence than here, because it's still here. There are many opportunities for local brands to develop and gain the market. There, because of all the restrictions to importation, you have brands that are still very strong. And for example, in the beauty industry, two of the main brands there that represent 60-70% of the market are local. Have been there for years and are still very connected to this population, and now are expanding. And I will give an example: Natura, Natura, that is also here in Mexico, that made their international now, their brand more international, so they can adapt to other markets. But they're still they have their Brazilian essence, and the consumers are very attached to that. And this goes across all the different industries, that we track. But of course, when you go, for example, for entertainment, that the big influence is global content. It's basically the same. If you see a Marvel movie here that is important and leading the product sales, there's going to happen the same. So it all depends. I think there are differences, and again, going back to the retail landscape, it's so different. Here is much more developed in a way that is more national. We have these big chains that can take the products everywhere, and there is still more local. You have differences even across the states, and depends on where you are.
Chris, when I go with Daniel to do store checks at malls over there, the amount of local, successful, beautiful chains and stores is amazing. Here is more of those global brands. Over there is like ton of national, local chains that are performing well.
Yeah, the differences are there. E-commerce there is much more important, no? The size of the market, this situation between not having really big chains that could cover the whole country, this e-commerce has become very important to take the products to all these consumers, no? And we have categories that is basically the same size as the US, no? 30%, 35% of the consumption is going through e-commerce. Credit also, no? Brazil has a big banking penetration, and this also, no, was important for the market to develop this channel and make consumers be more digital. No, Brazil is the second most digitalized government in the world, so like people are used to really using digital to.
Brazilians are very happy people.
Yeah.
They dance for
Yeah,
whatever
dance
reason
for
they're dancing,
whatever.
and
Yeah,
they
you're going through a crisis and you
So,
dance.
a huge country, so digital makes probably more sense.
Yeah.
complicated geography.
Yes,
Also.
yes, and taxation there is so complex. No, you have imagined that your VAT is per product per state.
Oh, wow.
So, like, for you to manage a big chain that is across the whole country, it's so complex, no, that you still have your state ones that are more, no, like very good at what they do, but they're focused on that
It
state.
takes sometimes our customers years to really make it in Brazil.
Yeah,
Once they make it, they're successful.
they're
It's a
successful.
great market, but it's complicated, and they need to understand it well. And even the large corporations struggle at the beginning with the market, but
Yeah.
then they do well.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, Ricardo, and for joining us. It's been super interesting to keep on talking for hours, but
Yeah.
I know you have to go. So hope to get you back on our podcast in a year or so.
Please, please. Thank you so much. Yeah, great.
Who has been working with Bloomberg for 10 years. And we invited her because she did a very good story, brilliant story on the fraudulent real estate transactions that are taking place in Tulum, one of the prime destinations of American tourists and of American investors in real estate that want to retire or either own a secondary home in Tulum to enjoy, obviously, beautiful weather and a beautiful area and a beautiful place. So, Andrea, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Very happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about how did you find out about this story, and what are the main takeaways you brought and that we read on the brilliant reporting that you did about this unfortunate situation that is taking place in Tulum?
Thank you. Well, the story actually started completely different. We had a completely different angle, and we wanted to look at the real estate industry or section in Tulum because I remembered that back before the pandemic and even when the pandemic was starting, I remember seeing a lot of advertisements for apartments. They were selling a lot of apartments there, and they were being sold as this promise of a great investment. The idea was that demand was so high that the apartment would be rented mostly like the largest part of the year, and so the mortgage, if you took out one, could be paid off of that, and in turn, you could have a vacation home at Tulum's gorgeous beach. So I was interested in just taking a look at how that had panned out, and I knew of several people who had bought apartments back in 2020, 2021. I myself even went to a couple of these like friends and family dinners that they held here in Mexico City where they presented the project, and many of them even had inside administration so that they could handle the reservations and the rentals for the rest of the year while you didn't have to take care of Airbnb and all those platforms. They would do it in-house. So yeah, that's what piqued my interest, and I started talking to a couple of acquaintances and people that got connected through other people that I knew, and talked to plenty of people who told me that they had gotten their apartment, but it wasn't really a good investment. There was so much construction, and supply grew so much, and then the vacation trends changed, and nomads started coming home, so it didn't really pan out. Yeah, it wasn't a good investment, but the apartments were there, and it was all fine. But then, in talking to some friend that I have, she told me about a work friend. I was looking for more people to interview, and she told me about a work friend who had never gotten his apartment, and he had been involved in a lawsuit for many years. So I said, I need to talk to that guy. So I ended up having coffee with him, and he's named story. He's Sutank. We had a very long coffee, and that's when he told me this very crazy story that involved Aquela Development Group, this company that was made up originally of 3 partners. And by the time I talked to Sutank, none of the partners were around. So it took me a while to wrap my head around the craziness of the story and the size of. We're very careful about calling it a scam or a fraud because we couldn't talk to the partners, obviously, so we don't really know their intent, but the size of the problem. So that's when I asked Sotank to get me in touch. He had mentioned some of these WhatsApp groups where other investors were involved. And so he put a message in there for me and just said, hey, listen, there's this reporter who wants to write about this. If you're interested, go ahead and reach out. And my cell phone just blew up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the scope, and for those who haven't read your story, is that a group of people have been defrauded by paying before for the apartment that was never completed or built.
Exactly.
And the land is empty as it was. Now, this real estate company had already developed other properties. So they had a track record that made probably those that invested on it a little bit more confident. Is that right?
They had one building delivered. So they had 30 units in that building. It is called Tulum Peaceful. That was built before the pandemic, as far as we know. I don't have an exact date, but we do know that that's what pulled in a lot of people. It gave them confidence because pre-sale is a very common thing in Quintana Roo and in Mexico, I would say. And the fact that the local government is still very archaic. So files aren't digitized. There's no way to check things if you're not there personally. So it just makes for a very uneven landscape for those who want to buy there and for those who want to also construct there. It's not easy for them. And from what I heard from these local lawyers, there's also a lot of problems with regulations and getting permits, and it's much more expensive than the builders initially assume. So there's a lot of cases where they just run out of money because they didn't expect all of these costs to add up. So it's just a
so the pre-sales figures don't add up for what the cost of the final product is.
Exactly.
Now, in your story, the green part of it is that 2 of the 3 partners are dead.
Yes.
One appeared dead on the beach, and the other one seems to have committed suicide.
Exactly.
Did that give you any more sense of the irregularity of the problem, or what's your take on that?
It was a part of the story that it was very hard to understand what had happened. We know that the first partner, the one who turned up dead on the beach, he had been missing for a couple of days. From what I heard talking to people there, it was after a party. So the circumstances were very shady. And unfortunately, the prosecutor's office couldn't respond to any of my requests. So I don't really know what turned up from that investigation. But the circumstances were definitely shady. And then 2 years after that, more or less, the second partner turned up dead, and I did get a chance to review the police report from that scene, and apparently they interviewed the son, and the son had told the police that his dad had been involved in a lot of debt. He had lost a lot of money, and he was depressed. So we unfortunately can't confirm that one thing led to another, but we can paint a picture of a business model that just unraveled.
Did you hear from anyone, mostly Americans that were invested and didn't get their property back, that they were threatened in any way if they followed a just sort of off?
Yes, not directly, but through their lawyers. They did hear. So many of the victims that I talked to had passed through 1, 2, 3 lawyers because it's very complicated to hire a lawyer that they trust, that they can understand themselves with, because they speak English, the lawyer speaks Spanish. So there's a lot of hurdles there. But another one is exactly that. They did hear from several lawyers who were threatened at some point by the company or by notaries. I also heard a lot of problems with notaries and a corrupt system of notaries that work with these developers in changing paperwork or the titles to the land. So that was a part of the story that we didn't really touch on a lot because that would have taken us down another rabbit hole. It was complicated enough as it was, but there is something there about how corrupt the system is and how there's no real way for foreigners to really check who the developers are, and how trustworthy they are, and that seems to be a big part of the problem.
And what about extortion being paid to drug-related cartels by construction companies? Is that something that you heard about?
Not, thankfully not. Yeah. Obviously, we know that there's some cartel presence in the region and that it's grown over the past few years. That I heard from some of the buyers who did get their apartments, that the landscape has changed quite a bit. Like, you didn't used to see men selling drugs on the beach out in the daylight, but now it's something that you do see, and that has hurt also
Property values,
exactly. But I didn't hear anything about them directly extorting the developers or the buyers themselves.
So it's how do you say, it's a cautionary tale for investors. What would you tell those that are listening from your reporting? What experiences, what lessons do you think they should take out of your reporting on these scams?
Yeah, well, it's tricky because several of the victims that I spoke to told me that even before they bought from Aquela in this case, they had heard of problems with land theft and with titles, and they really made a point of taking precautions. They hired real estate firms that were reputable. They traveled often. They tried to see what was going on with the construction. They got updates, and so they were really blindsided because they thought they were being careful.
Right.
This wasn't a sale done over the internet that they didn't know much about. They really tried to
follow all the necessary steps.
Right, and especially because foreigners can't buy land on the beach in Mexico that easily. There's tons of regulations, and they have to set up a trust, and there has to be a bunch of lawyers involved in the process. So they really did take care of crossing their T's and dotting their I's, but in the end, it just didn't work. So I would say the best piece of advice that I could give is just make sure that the track record is long. From the developer's track record is long. In this case, one building wasn't enough. Yeah. And just check that they're real. I did see one presentation that Aquela was using to sell the apartments, and when I saw it, and obviously I knew everything that by that time, but the amount of work that they claimed to have done, it wasn't really reasonable. Like, they claimed to have worked with all of the largest companies in Mexico. I'm not going to name any names, but it wasn't feasible, especially when I heard that the main partner, the man who apparently hung himself, he was a real estate broker before he set up Aquela in 2018. So the timeline didn't make sense. It's really getting into the backstory and learning who these developers are and trying to check that the documents that they present are true.
So fact checking would have probably prevented them from getting involved with this real estate developer.
Quite often people ask me, should they buy this house on the beach or in the countryside of Mexico? And I say, if it's mainly for a second home or retirement home, try and rent for a year before you buy. Because you get to know the neighborhood. Because the problems are not only the possibility of fraud, which we assume is the minority of cases, but it's also the lifestyle in the end isn't as romantic and exciting as you thought it was. And then to try and sell these houses on the secondary market is a big issue because there's not a lot of liquidity, and the gap between the bid ask in Mexico, countryside or beaches can be quite wide, much wider than the US, which is a much more liquid market. So I always try to tell people, rent, get to know the place, get to know who is who, and then you have a whole year, rent for a year, to look at houses to buy, calmly and professionally and leisurely.
Yeah, and I would also maybe avoid pre-sale. It's a huge bet. It's a huge gamble, and in the end, the people that I spoke to will tell you that it wasn't worth it. Those pre-sale deals can seem enticing, but in the end, you end up paying with nothing, or paying a lot more than you anticipated, or waiting a lot more than you thought you would. So maybe just seeing that the property is there and it's livable and it's
All of you.
Exactly.
I think that's a really good advice. Avoid pre-sale, because even in Mexico City, I've seen a lot of pre-sale that doesn't live up to the renders
Exactly.
and the
The
PowerPoints.
finishes, no? Yeah.
And one last thing, Andrea, you mentioned the pandemic. Do you think that had anything to do with the falling out of the company or being in trouble? Or...
Yeah, I think it did. I think that the construction boom did take off during the pandemic. I think it had started to creep up in like 2018, 2019. But then during the pandemic, so many people traveled to Tulum because there weren't any restrictions.
Yeah, Mexico was open too.
Mexico was
Anyway.
open, everything was open. And so people just flocked there. And many, with the work from home requirements changing, they thought, I'm going to stay. And so that pulled in a lot of developers. And some of them were reputable and had a track record, and some of them didn't. So in the end, it created this perfect moment for chaos.
Which materialized.
Exactly.
Well, Andrea, thank you very much. I don't know if you want to say anything else.
No.
Thank you. Great work.
Thank you.
It was quite illustrious of cautionary tale of what takes place in some places of Mexico. We don't want to give a bad name to the country. You and I are Mexicans.
We are proud Mexicans.
Proud Mexicans. But thank you very much.
No, thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm honored to introduce David Connell, who, David, correct me if I'm wrong, is one of the very few U.S. citizens with a law degree from Mexico, specializing in corporate law and more precisely in real estate law. Am I right?
Thank you, Eduardo. Yes, that's correct. I came down from San Diego a long time ago and went to law school in Mexico City, and there weren't a lot of us down here doing that at the time, but still here.
Good. Yeah, David, as he says, arrived here in the early 1990s, studied that law degree from the Technological University of Mexico in 1997, and before founding his current law firm, Connell and Associates, in 2003, which is based in Puerto Vallarta with offices in Ixtapas y Guatanejo and Mexico City, he worked at the law firm Martinez del Campo del Rio here in the capital of the country, and he later partnered with Dennis Payton, another rare American attorney with a Mexican law degree, to establish Payton, Connell and Associates. The firm initially had offices in Mexico City, San Diego, Tijuana, and Ixtapas y Guatanejo, later expanding to Puerto Vallarta. Eventually, they parted ways, and Connell and Associates was born. David, thank you for taking the time to speak with Damien and me.
Well, thank you guys very much for having us.
Now, over the past 30 years, you've witnessed firsthand the legal and practical evolution of property rights in Mexico, reforms in many cases aimed at securing real estate investments for both Mexicans and foreigners. Yet significant uncertainty, if I'm right, remains when conducting real estate transactions in the country. We spoke with Bloomberg reporter Andrea Navarro, who, along with a colleague, investigated American investors in Tulum whose funds seem to have vanished. Does Mexico still have a Wild West reputation when it comes to real estate, where investments often go sour, or was what Andrea reported an isolated case of lawlessness in a specific area? What's your impression?
Well, in 1994, with as kind of a tee-up for the free trade agreement between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, there were a lot of reforms done. Those reforms included foreigners having more access to getting title to real estate in Mexico if they were in the restricted zone, that zone that's 50 kilometers from the ocean or 100 kilometers from the border. The foreigners could have now 50-year trusts that were renewable. We also had the agrarian reform Procede, where approximately 70% of all Mexican real estate went from an agrarian ejido situation that was unsellable to being able to regularize their property. And all of this, once regularized, could now be sold to third parties. So there was, between the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a real boom on people being able to purchase real estate, especially foreigners, our baby boomers coming down from the United States and Canada and buying. So you had just a mass influx of people buying in Mexico. And unfortunately, the majority of them are great stories, but we do have a lot of stories where people got a little ahead of themselves and didn't do the due diligence and had some problems.
Is this still going on, or you sound like that was in the past, but the report from Andrea was just from transactions that took place quite recently.
Well, you do. We have areas that are still boom areas, and we have situations. We had it prior to the financial crisis of 2009, where there were boom areas and people were buying pre-sale properties, which means properties that have not been fully built out or deeded. We saw that boom happen in 2009, and with the crash, that a lot of these projects weren't finished. We've seen this boom in the Riviera Maya, where especially in Playa del Carmen and Tulum, where just project after project is being promoted. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of incentives for the local government to make sure that all of those projects are properly titled or permitted. And then when things start to unravel, you have projects stop. You have investors lose their money, and it's still going on. But hopefully, we'll see it, be curtailed a little bit in the near future.
What will be your advice for anyone that wants to invest in a property on the beach in Mexico? What will be the first 3 things they need to follow before making any investment?
The 2 divisions are, is it something that's already built and deeded that you can go check with an attorney or notary to see if you can get deeded? Or if you're going to be doing a pre-sale, which is a pre-construction purchase, which is something that's not deeded yet. And when you do that, you're basically financing these projects. They're not getting financing from the bank, they're getting financing from purchasers. And if you're going to do that, there's some basic things you can do. You want to make sure that the developer has title to the property and permits. It's pretty crazy that there's a lot of developers out there that don't even own the land or have permits when you kind of dig down a little bit into it. A developer who's doing something right should provide you with their title and their permits. And then on the contract side, you just want to make sure that, payments are done on advancement of the project. They're not done on, per se, on a fixed date. Because if it's a fixed date thing and the date comes, you have to make the payment whether or not the building's still going on or not. If it's on advancement, it's on advancement. And then we usually ask people to do, when they're doing these, to say, keep a holdback of, 20, 30, maybe up to 40% until you were actually delivered the deed and possession of the unit. And the last one is we say, make sure your payments go through an escrow. The escrow helps us keep track of payments. And some unscrupulous developers will ask you to make a payment to one account and then another account and then another company. And that's not correct. You should be making the payments all to one developer, and the escrow will help you line that up so payments are made to the right party.
You sound like you have a clear advice on how to invest here, especially if it's undeveloped yet. If it's already developed, then the risks are lower. Am I right?
Correct. The risks are lower. You still want to make sure somebody's checking title for you. There is a public property registry. You can hire an attorney. Some real estate agents provide that service. Notaries provide that service. You do still want to check title, and we're not going to say just jump right into blindly when it's built and has title, but it is much less risk buying a titled property that's already built versus something that's in the process of being built or that is going to be built in the future and is just, say, jungle right now.
Correct. Are there certain areas of Mexico that offer greater risks in this type of investments?
We work pretty much all over Mexico. You're looking at areas where people are, I think they're the hip areas where people want to go to right now. I mean, currently you've got your big 3, which is Cabo San Lucas area, Puerto Vallarta area, and Cancun. Those are our 3 biggest tourist destinations in Mexico. So, Mexico is the residential tourism capital, residential tourism capital of the world. I mean, there's more residential tourism in Mexico than anywhere else due to our proximity to Canada, the U.S., and the airlift we have. So, these 3 destinations are going to be your principal destinations where you're going to see a lot of residential tourism development. That doesn't mean that there aren't other areas. We have Manzunte down by Puerto Escondido. We've got, Huatulco. We've got Ixtapas y Guatanejo. Up in the north in Sonora, you have Rocky Point. But there are areas that, have more building going on. There are problems in every single one of them. There are great developments, and there are, unfortunately, some that are not doing things the right way.
A story like the one in Bloomberg with the Tulum fraudsters, how much does that damage the industry overall?
Well, it damages us all as a tourism country. I mean, people come down here to have a good time and to invest. And when they invest and their investments go south, it's not good for the investor, and it's definitely not good for the destination. It's not good for the other developers or any other professionals working with that development. And what you'll find in a lot of these areas, if you work with top, the people that have a track record in the communities, your real estate agents, your attorneys, your developers, they're going to try and push you away from possibly, developments that seem a little bit off. But at the same time, some of these developments that are, they just look so good. They attract people, and they attract people that are willing to take the risk and not do their due diligence.
In the case of what Andrea reported, when the company had a track record with the development they had already done. Unfortunately, the second or third one, I don't know which one, was the one that they didn't complete, didn't materialize. So yeah, I guess due diligence, link yourself with professionals, seek counsel are key for these type of investments.
Yeah, just like any investment, you want to have that.
Damien here. Do you ever, if people, if the real estate company fails to, deliver the house, do you have examples where the property owner successfully sues the company and gets that money? Or in the overwhelming majority of cases, the company gets decapitalized, can't find the original shareholders, or it gets bogged down in Mexican courts? You just don't find a solution.
Yeah, we've worked on cases over the last 30 years that range from walkaways where the people just have to walk away because there's nothing going on. The developer's gone. There's a piece of land with a bank loan on it. And if it's going to go into bankruptcy, the buyers are going to be so far down the line as creditors, they're really not going to get anything back. Those are the worst case scenarios. We have worked with and are continuing to work with people that have been in those situations. What we always try and do is get in there and do a workout. Sometimes these buyers are willing to put up a little more money and have somebody take over the project to get it finished if that's available. We did one, I say a good scenario, where the developer walked away. He owed $2 million to the bank, and every one of the condominium owners agreed to put up a little more money above what they paid for the unit. They'd all paid in full. They had not gotten title. They put up a little more money, paid off the bank loan, and got their deeds, and they're happy because their properties went up in value as soon as they had deeds. So it's yes, we've worked on from the worst case scenario to the best case scenario, but the majority of these developments that have the type of problem that we're seeing with a specific case, it's a real tough situation. It's a bad investment, which usually in the majority of the cases, the investors, these buyers, are having to walk away from what they invested.
And how easy is it to get financing for these type of beach projects?
Well, that's one of the big things there. It's the financing in Mexico is quite a bit higher than the United States, so it's difficult. They're not going to finance a project, a bank, unless they can see that the person owns the land and there's clean title. And they also have all of the permits, because the bank's going to lend you when you have title and permits, and they're also going to require you to put an initial investment into the infrastructure. So a lot of these investors go the direction of saying, hey, I can get these buyers to give me money up front and I'll use that money to build. And some of them go so far as to say, I'll use this money to not only build, I'll use it to buy the land and pay all of my soft initial cost, my engineer, my architect, and everything. And they're basically getting these pre-sale buyers to finance the whole entire project.
Well, David, you have anything else?
No, that's been super instructive. If I ever buy a place in the Mexican beach, I know who I'm going to be calling.
That's for sure. That's the lesson I'm getting out of this one. Never go on your own, or don't trust anyone unless you've double check every T, every I in every content and every document you see. Well, David, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Well, yeah, I mean, these are unfortunate situations, and I think you're looking at less than 5% of the type of real estate transactions we see in Mexico. They're the bad stories. Fortunately, we get to deal with the majority of them are good stories where people do come down to Mexico, buy, and do well on their investment. And they also not only do well on their investment, they get something that's actually a very big enjoyment in their life, and they find that lifestyle that maybe where they're from they didn't have.
Yeah, that's a good point. Generally, the rotten tomatoes are the ones that are highlighted, while the whole crop might be juicy and perfectly edible, and that's what happens. But from your perspective, most of your clients that eventually do invest and successfully do so, they're very happy, and the real estate value of their property goes up, and so they did a good investment in the end.
That's the majority of the people that we do have and see. Yeah, we do see the bad ones, have to litigate some of them out, but most of them are good stories, not bad stories.
Well, on that note, David, thank you very, very much for spending some time with us. We'll be contacting you either personally or for another podcast in the future.
Thank you guys for having me. Look forward to speaking to you in the future and discussing other stuff too.
Great. Well, that's what I have for this week. If there's nothing from you, Eduardo, thank you everyone for joining, and hope you join us next week for Next Moves.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice week.